All right, so let's move on to our first anomaly, which is the concurrent anomaly. So a concurrent anomaly is a CalPAS inconsistency where a student has two or more primary enrollment records simultaneously in different schools or districts. It actually it's more in on a district, right? It can also occur if a student has a primary and a short term of more than 30 days. The system flags this overlaps because a student should have only one primary enrollment at a time. So the core issue here is that the student is listed as being in a primary status at two different schools at the same time, which is not allowed in CalPADS. So as you can see in this diagram, you have two LEAs, and both LEAs are overlapping certain calendar dates here. So if you have a primary enrollment, both of you are primary enrollment, then it will trigger a CCE. Right, so a CCE can trigger depending on the enrollment status combinations that exist in CalPAS between two LEAs. There are combinations that will not cause CCEs. First would be a primary enrollment with a short-term enrollment that has not exceeded 30 days, and then a primary enrollment and a secondary enrollment, and then a primary enrollment and non-ADA. However, this one doesn't really exist that often because normally if a student is a non-ADA, essentially the student is receiving instruction at a private school, and so they only exist in CalPAS because the LEA is providing special ed services with a non-ADA setup. Although this combination works, this doesn't happen that often. Now let's discuss enrollment combinations that causes a CCE, right? So you have two primary enrollments between two LEAs. So and their enrollments overlap. You either have two open active enrollments at the same time, or one enrollment is active, the second is closed, but the dates overlap each other. And that also applies to primary and short term enrollment that exceeds more than 30 days. So, by rule of thumb, if let's say a student is at an alternative education school or this at the COE due to some juvenile issues, if the student stays there for more than 30 days, that LEA should then switch their enrollment to a primary enrollment if the student exceeds 30 days. And then the initial primary enrollment LEA would then exit their enrollment a day before that student started their enrollment at the COE or at the juvenile enrollment school. Right. So this guide explains how ownership and responsibility for resolving a CCE are assigned when two LEAs report overlapping enrollments for the same student. So, in principle, all LEAs involved are responsible for resolving the CCE regardless of ownership rules. Okay? So, even if the anomaly belongs to one LEA officially, if when I say it belongs to an LEA, it doesn't show up by default in your CCE report. Okay? Both must coordinate to fix it. So the yellow line here in the middle represents the time span that an anomaly is being considered, right? So it's 8/16 of the prior year up to fall 1 census day this year, which is October 1st. So once an LEA has an active enrollment and then another LEA as their enrollment in CalPADS, for the first 14 days of detection, both LEAs will see those anomalies in their reports. Since you both have full responsibility to resolve that anomaly, so during the first 14-day period. Once the first 14 day of detection passes, only the LEA that has the prior enrollment will have the responsibility to fix that anomaly. So even if let's say this LEA2 is in the wrong for hijacking your enrollment, it will not show up on their CCE report after 14 days, because the expectation is, or the assumption is, that a student should have exited LEA once school before LEA 2 picked up that LEA, right? So and this behavior, this rule would manifest on how you manage your reports too. Okay. So again, if let's say you wonder, okay, I have a CCE, how come this doesn't show up on my report? Maybe it already passed the 14-day period and you just missed it. And so that's the reason why it's not showing up on your CCE. So if you select all or other LEA in the filter that I will be showing in the demo later on, then you should be able to see those anomalies. Okay. All right, so there are common causes of CCEs here. First is that, the obvious reason, the previous enrollment either is missing the exit information or overlaps the most current enrollment. So if this has an exit, but then the exit overlaps this, then that's essentially a CCE. And so you have to then look at your school site, see when they left, and reach out to the new LEA with regards to the ownership date. Okay. Another one is you have two or more students using the same SSID, which is essentially, it's basically a reverse mid, as I always call it, wherein you essentially hijack an SSID, right? So you have here, I have here my enrollment at Berkeley, and then Pleasanton Unified has theirs as well. But then if you look at the demographics, and there are some red flags that you might be able to identify here, like their first name, maybe their birth date are the same, but the race and ethnicity are different, and also their parent and guardian names might be different. So those are things that you might need to look at to determine if this is a hijacked SSID. And then the third one is that a student is attending two LEAs but has two primary enrollments. So as I've hinted earlier, these cases happen. Let's say if you have a student whose parents are, separated, and they want honor, they want custody of the student in X amount of days within the week, or X amount of weeks within the month, then it's best, if that's the scenario, it's best to just leave both enrollments as is. You don't have to resolve them, because it's more, cumbersome to be exiting your enrollment every week, or every month. So just leave it as is, and or you can make an arrangement. If both of you do not want to budge with regards to the primary enrollment, then so be it. But sometimes, one can be a 20, the other can be a 10, and that should resolve the CCEs, right? Then there's also some scenarios where you have an overachiever, right? You have a student who is a sixth grader. You have a Sheldon in the making, or Doogie Howser, who is an overachiever. I mean, so he's in sixth grade but are taking college classes. So essentially, the college is being offered at the high school, biology maybe, or calculus. You have a math wizard. So there are times when that occurs. And so when that happens, one has to be a 20, right? So the primary school where the student is geographically staying at should be the 10. And then if the student is just receiving additional instruction on top of their elementary school instruction, then that should be a 20, right? Right. So when resolving CCEs, you have to ask the right questions when troubleshooting, right? We have an acrostic here, but I had to, force these questions to start with the letters I want to show up here, right? So have we established continued ownership of the right student, right? So when a CCE occurs, you have to investigate if you still have full ownership, if the student is still in attendance. Then number two, sometimes you may have the wrong enrollment type. You could be a 20, or maybe the student already should have been a 50 all along, right? Then if you are a COE and you're past the 30 days, then of course you may have to switch that 30 to a 10, right? And then if you are the LEA where the student was primary enrolled in, and that's when they went to juvenile hall, then of course you have to exit the student once they go past the 30-day threshold. And then what was the last day of actual student participation, right? And then of course, if you want to dig deeper, you can into all of the student information. You can look at their parents' name, in their demographic information, their address, to see if you may have inadvertently hijacked a SSID, or if another LEA who you have a CCE with may have hijacked it. Right? So that's essentially my acrostic. So again, resolving CCEs, you can resolve CCEs by correcting enrollment or exit dates, enrollment start, exit dates, correcting their enrollment status or exit codes, and deleting the enrollment record and get a new SSID if you've hijacked that student's SSID. So in resolving CCEs, if you guys have a CCE that is unresolvable, meaning the other LA doesn't want to budge, you can always, send in a ticket to us, send in a service ticket, and we will be a mediator and help with if there are any impasse in your CC, right? Okay, so before I go into the demo, do we have any questions we need to highlight?
Yes, Kyron.
Yes, Nate.
Nicole has a question. What if two students are using the same SSID and the other LEA refuses to create a second SSID after multiple times of reaching out? Students have different names, birthdates, and parent names, and my district created the original SSID.
Good question. That's when you send us a service ticket, and we have the ability to see who really created that SSID, and then we can essentially tell the other LEA to create their own SSID.
If this is a reverse mid. Kyron had mentioned
Yeah.
hijacking, and the steps are very involved. So a lot of times we like to assist to make sure that the erroneous records don't create orphan records. I don't know if
Yeah.
Kyron will talk about this later because it's so complicated. It's usually not part of our standard training.
Yeah. But we'll see. All right. So, and then what is the time frame that you recommend before reaching out to CCs for support with resolving? I mean, if it depends. I mean, if you got a response from the other LEA, and the response doesn't seem to be what you wanted to be, and you want us to mediate or to help out, then we could do so. We could probably investigate who created the SSID and see other alternatives, and involve the other LEA if they need to make adjustments on their side too.
I always recommend when I have to mediate calling the LEA.
Yeah.
We like to handle all our business, you
Mail.
know, online communications. We prefer that as well. But when someone needs a phone call, we always oblige. And I think sometimes actually calling or at least making that attempt helps.
Yes, I agree. All right. So with that, let's go to our demo. Okay, let's go to home, and let's see our CCEs here. Right, so for the first CCE, let's go to anomaly status, and we have three CCEs here. See how it went directly to the CCE resolutions when I click on the number on the home page. So that's also a way to go directly here. Another way is by going to online maintenance, anomaly management, and clicking on CCE, and it should bring you here. So if so, let me just discuss the interface that we have here. So you have a link to the CCE anomaly reports. It should give you the list of CCE SSIDs that you need to resolve in a spreadsheet. So let's say if you don't want to resolve this, but you want to pass this on to another colleague or to school sites, you could just download the anomalies report and then send it out to the different school sites. Okay, you can filter by school if you want to. That way, each file would be just specific to that school. Okay, that could be done too. Okay, so now you have your reporting period. So if you notice here, you have 25-26 and 26-27. Inversely, if you open this up before census day, you would have a 24-25, 24-25, and a 25-26 option. So don't be alarmed if you open up the start of the year and you open up this CCE section and you have a last year CCE. That's fine. And it should default still to 24-25 prior to census day. That's okay. Once census day hits, then it becomes a 25-26. So it's just a matter of toggling between the filters. So if you look at 25-26, the academic year would cover the process date, right? So the enrollment from date would be from August 16, 2024 up to census day. So it follows the dropout completer cycle start date, which is 8/16 of the prior year up to census day. And then you have your reporting LEA. You can filter for school. You can even filter for SSID if you have a SSID that an LEA pointed out. And then, of course, you should be able to see the information here. So sometimes if you want to see other CCEs that are beyond your responsibility, but you have an overlapping enrollment with another LEA, you can also pick this. So you have here, you can filter for one LEA at a time, right? So you have an ACCE with Berkeley Unified, Dublin Unified, and Pleasanton Unified, right? So let's look at the first CCE here. So we have Beats Meiser. This is Marshall's alter ego in Calpad. So if I click on open here, so it says here the focus ID is this, and then you have a matching SSID. So you have active enrollments between you and Dublin Unified. Okay, and if I scroll here, I see Dublin Unified's contact person. This is my colleague Nate, and he picked up this student, and now we have an overlapping enrollment with them. So to resolve this, you then would just, go directly to their enrollment. You can just rely on this and say, oh, yeah, that's an overlapping enrollment. You have to go to that student details section. So if you click on the linkable student name, it brings you to the student details. And if you have your SCNR role and view, you should be able to see the enrollment record. And then if you've assigned all of the other roles as well, then that would be nice because you can expand and review the different supporting documents here, right? So let's look at Beatsmeister. Says here that I initially enrolled the student on 8/15. but then Dublin Unified picked up the student on 9:15. So since this is probably almost a month gap, then I would reach out to my school site and say, hey, is this kid still here? Or when was the last time the kid was enrolled, right? Or in attendance. So if the school site says that the student is no longer at the district, then of course the easiest route is to just exit the student with the date the last student with the student's last attendance day in at the district, right, at the school site. So sometimes your school sites may have just haven't gotten into exiting the student in the SIS, or you may have not uploaded your weekly updates yet or your monthly updates, and so this is still open. So to resolve this, just open up your record and exit the student. Okay, so let's say the student is still here, right? The student is still in CalPads and is actually sitting at the desk right now at your school site. And so that means my dear friend Nate may have picked up the wrong student, right? May have hijacked my SSID. I knew that guy was always trouble. Even and so I have to reach out to Nate. I email him and say, hey Nate, this student is we have a CCE with this student. I need to have the student tested, or I need ownership of the student. Could you check if this is the right student that or SSID that you've picked up? So, and if Nate doesn't respond through email, I call him. And if it's close to the deadline and he still doesn't respond, and I'm just barely above the 2% threshold, I could go harass him. But that but I wouldn't prescribe that, but I would, just reach out and tell him that, hey, this needs to be fixed, right? So you can also look at the demographic information of the student to see if this is the same student. I guess because of the lack of information here, I couldn't, you know, be able to see right away if this is a hijack SSID or not, right? So again, for this scenario, it's just a plain and simple. The student left and I didn't close this enrollment. So kudos to Nate for submitting his enrollment on time once he picked up the student. So I just have to exit the student on my end. So, and it turns out the student left the district on 9/12. And then I add a T160. T160. And then this is not necessary, but if you do want to be more thorough, you can just put Frederickson Elementary in here as well. Okay, so I just click on post, and that should resolve this CCE. Okay, so that's the first scenario. The second scenario is red volcanic lesson. Let's first do this. So for a volcanic lesson, you have here a student who is in 6th grade, and then for some reason he has a 9th grade level enrollment at Berkeley Unified, the real Berkeley, right? And so I check, I look at the demographic record. He doesn't have a demo record yet at Berkeley because it just so happened that they just posted it this today. And so I look at the English language, nothing, no address. So I reach out to Berkeley. I reach out to my school site, and they've mentioned that the student is simultaneously getting instruction at Berkeley because this student is a genius, right? So we have, as I mentioned, a Sheldon for our Gen Zs, or if you're a Gen Xer, we have our ever dear friend Doogie Howser, right? So you can click on. So if that's the case, if the student is just getting additional instruction for high school classes at Berkeley Unified, then you have to reach out to Berkeley and say that they should change this to a 20. So reach out to Berkeley, and then Berkeley says, "Oh, okay, yeah, we can fix that." So they change this to a 20, and then after a few hours, the data discrepancy refresh happens, and this then disappears in your list. Okay, so that's an easy fix if you have that scenario. Now, if you, let's say you have, as I mentioned, a scenario where you have two parents with a that has custody issues, or they have a arrangement in the course where they share the student in certain days or certain weeks every month, or certain days every week, then for purposes of reporting, they could one of you could potentially be a 20 as well. Or if none wants to do that, because of course you have ADA, right? So you can both have a 10. Okay. Right. And that should then be part of your 2% anomaly threshold. But then again, that's that's something that you can't really have control of and can't resolve. Right. Okay, so the third one is red cherry. So for red cherry, I click on this student, and I have here, I enrolled the student first, and this is training Pleasanton enrolled the student on 8/18. So I look at, so it says 8/18, 8/14, they have the same birth date, right? But then, of course, you want to dig deeper into this CCE. So you go to yours and click on the demographic information. You scroll down. Of course, you refer to your SIS to see if you have the proper information. The student indeed is cherry red. And then the student is has mixed race. And then the student's parent's name is Alisa Red. Okay. Okay. So that's that. Alisa Red. And you look at your SIS, you indeed have that information as well in there. Then you then open up Cherry Red. Obviously, they have the same birth date but different names. Scroll here and look at this. The student was born in Jacksonville, Florida. They probably just transferred. She is mixed race, is Hispanic and Filipino. And then the parents are different, right? You have blazing red. Looks like sounds like hot chicken wings. And then of course you have candy red as the parents' other name. So obviously these are two different students, right? They have two different parents, two different names, right? So again, if this issue occurs, what you do is then reach out to your colleague at Pleasanton. So who is the Pleasanton? Who is my colleague at Pleasanton? I go to the CCE resolution details. I scroll down, and what here, it's DJ Marshall, right? So I reach out to DJ Marshall and say, hey, you may have hijacked one of my students, because we have two different students with two different parents here. So Marshall investigates, and true enough, Marshall then sees, oh yeah, these are two different students, right? He agrees, but then he already, let's say, submitted all of the information for that student in CalPAS and didn't want to do you know, do the trouble of recreating an SSID. And so he didn't want to budge, right? And so I sent up a ticket to CalPADS stating that, hey, this LEA doesn't want to, you know, may have hijacked the SSID and doesn't need and needs to create their own SSID. Could you prove that I created the SSID in CalPADS? And so we would then investigate, we would do a query and see who created the SSID. And true enough, that SSID was created by by me, by CSIS, or no, by CSIS Berkeley, right? And so the service ticket would say, hey, yeah, I agree with CSIS Berkeley Unified. Would you please delete your records from this student? So what you do is, again, go back. If I was Berkeley, if I was Marshall, let me just go back here, be a state user. So if I was Marshall and I have, you know, a responsibility of deleting my enrollments and creating a new SSID, what I would do first is, you know, delete all pertinent data that is in here, or maybe not this one, because these are all read-only accounts. So if you have services, plans, meetings, status, work base, okay, we don't have any of that. Incident, nothing. Summary, SCTE. So essentially, you need to check if you may have updated records of the students already in CalPADS. Okay, programs, SILA, address, demographics. So I guess you only had both the demographic and SCNR information posted at this time. So what you do as the LEA who needs to create a new SSID, you have to delete your record, right? Delete all supporting records first. That way you don't end up orphaning those records and leaving all of these incorrect records to to the other LEA to resolve. Okay, so deleted that. We have that, and then of course I can delete my enrollment. And then once this is all deleted, you can then create a new SSID, request a new SSID for the student. So this is an easy fix, right? But then what if you have ELAS records of EL already in CalPADS for the wrong SSID? So you have first to reach out to LPAC, to TOMS, request for them to delete the EL status. You could probably request a stairs, do a stairs request to delete that record before deleting all of this other demographic information and the enrollment record. Once the EL status has been is corrected and your records are gone, then that's when you start deleting your information from the SSID and then requesting a new one. Okay? So yeah, so that's how to resolve concurrent enrollment. So now if I go back here to my concurrent enrollment table and I click on apply filters. No, where's my? I now only have my Genius Kid Volcanic, Last and Volcanic in my list. So that's how you resolve the CCE. And of course, if I go back to my home page, I should now hopefully have a lower anomaly status threshold, 20%. See how by just correcting 2, I've reduced it to reduce 13% anomaly, right? Okay, so that's how to resolve CCEs.